Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Mario Diarmas, a Wellspring therapist and the host of today's show about the Surfside tragedy of the building collapse and Wellspring's response. The recent building collapse has affected our entire community, with many missing people still to be discovered and many families. With me today is Tova Krebs, president and co-founder of Wellspring, and Mark McGowan, Wellspring therapist and also an FIU professor in the School of Social Work and expert in trauma work with first responders. Together, we're going to discuss how a large traumatic event like this affects an entire community and how we can get through this hardship well. So Tova and Mark, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Mario.
Thanks, Mario.
And Mark, you're a specialist in this area and you've been on previous occasions. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, apart from being a Wellspring therapist, and I'm an associate dean of academic affairs in a College of Public Health, Social Work, and disaster management. In addition to that, I work as a mental health specialist with a federal disaster response team, what's called a DMAT team, Disaster Medical Assistance Team, and we deploy whenever needed in events that are declared disasters by the governor and the president. So we are on call 2 or 3 times a year and then respond when needed. So,
and we're so glad to have you on our staff, Mark, because you bring such expertise for this. We have an entire team of trauma specialists, but not as specialized as you, particularly for disasters. So I'm glad you're joining our program today.
It's a privilege.
No, and Tova, starting this off, it's important to acknowledge that one of our own therapists has been involved in this event. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I can, and only very cautiously. So we did have one of our staff members who was very directly involved in this and has suffered loss because of it. And so we all felt it. Our whole team felt it amongst us as we have come alongside this staff member. But we are trying to protect privacy right now for this family to kind of go through all of these traumatic losses and issues that are now affecting them, and just trying to protect that privacy. So we're asking that people give us that time and time for that person to be in a good place to tell their own story when they're ready. So yes, but we at Wellspring, besides being trauma specialists and wanting to get actively involved in helping people recover from this emotionally, we are emotionally involved in this particular disaster.
No, and our team has really rallied around praying together, utilizing the scriptures. All the resources at our disposal have been geared towards this, nothing short of remarkable. How have you seen, both of you, people respond?
Well, the way I've seen in terms of formal response, I was over at the site on Sunday, and at the time they have things very well organized in terms of managing surviving family members. They have a center there open 24 hours, 7 days a week for family members with loved ones in the building at the is at the Grand Beach Hotel. And the Miami-Dade Police Department's Criminal Investigations Division, the Homicide Unit, the Victim Advocacy Unit is there. And I was liaising with them. They have the very difficult job of working with the families and letting them know that their loved one was in the building. And they're working around the clock there. So the surviving family members, what I saw was being as well cared for as they could. People not in the building, but who were nearby, but are displaced. There was another place I visited with the Red Cross. I used to work with the Red Cross when I lived in North Carolina as a mental health worker up there as well. They have a location on Collins as well, where families can go and get support, both local and federal support. And well, Wellspring has been also opening its doors and arms to those who may be calling in. And I know that we've had at least one call, if not more, that I'm aware of that has called in need of support, who also has a loved one. What's been striking about this event was, though it's in another part of our county, for me, another completely opposite end of the county for me, where I live, I had 3 connections with people in the building, which was very remarkable. So the ripple effects have really been touching everyone, and I think that reflects with the response that we've been seeing. So, and one of my students, I have to say, also has family in the building, so I've been working with that student as well. So we weren't quite expecting it, but this has affected all of us, and I think the response, and particularly those working to remove the debris, the fire rescue folks, for example, all realize that they're working with people in the community that they live with. So it's quite difficult.
Yeah, and I see this response that I want to talk about in terms of vicarious trauma, because I have had phone call after phone call, as people know that we had someone involved in our staff that people from far away are calling, and how are you, and what can I do, and what can I send, and how can I help? And the desire of humans to help other humans is just risen, and it's always a beautiful thing to see, but I think there's a lot of vicarious trauma in this.
And Miami is so big and so small at the same time, because along with working at Wellspring, I'm in education. The school where I work, along with the school my sister's employed at, and my best friend's school, 3 high schools have a linkage with family members of victims. So I say to myself, wow, we're interconnected in this, and prayer circles have formed and outreach. And it's incredible how people have come together, but how people are so deeply affected by an event like this. Can you tell me a little bit about more the level of impact that this has?
Well, so we do have this term vicarious trauma, and really it's when it speaks of several things, but primarily in this case, it's about identifying with the victims. So if you think about all the ways, we identify with them because we live in Miami-Dade. We identify them. Some people maybe live in a high rise, so that's like, oh, that could be like me, or maybe they travel through that neighborhood regularly, or maybe they just live near the beach in an older building, or maybe like the woman who was rescued, they're a mother of a daughter, or maybe they are someone who's suddenly lost someone in an accident or an earthquake or something else. So there's so many ways that we say, this is like me, this could be me, this is directly affecting me and my psyche. And I want to say that because sometimes we think, we minimize those experiences, like, why am I so affected? Why am I teary? Why am I these things? And it's normal. It's normal to have these identifications. It's normal, good humanity at its best.
And the way there's 2 ways I look at this event. There's sort of a ripple effect. So we've got the folks who are close to it in both space and time, location and time, people who are in the building who survived it. Miraculously, people did survive the event, and they're going to be very strongly affected by this. But there's people who are also located nearby there, or even people who were there an hour before it happened, they left the building, or as my student had told me, that they were going to visit with their family member the next day. So these kind of close calls with those events will also affect other people. And then, of course, the responders themselves who are working the scene are having to deal with very, very difficult and very intense, very localized kind of responses that are not part of their regular routine. They do have to respond in very difficult situations normally, and they're very well trained that way. But nothing like this really can prepare you for that. And there's the other issue that kind of surfaces here, and this is actually more for down the road, though. in the cycle of this disaster response, we have sort of the heroic phase that we have been going through, where people mobilize. There was that person who saw the boy's hand coming out of the rubble and saved that boy before even the other responders were there or directed them to them. There was that phase there where people are doing things extraordinarily dangerous, but we're helping people. We have this honeymoon phase that we're still in, which is people kind of pitching in and collaborating and getting organized. We're going through that inventory phase they talk about, where we look at what we have, what we need. The resources are pouring in. The federal response is coming and it's here. The president's going to come here any day now. But then we get into a phase where things are just happening too slow for folks, and it gets frustrating. And that's that sort of that disillusionment phase, which in regular responses, events, it could take, up to a year or even sometimes longer. Hopefully, in this case, it'll be a shorter time. People want closure on the event. But in that event too, this is again in that longer term time frame, there's the issue of it wasn't a natural event in a way, that it might emerge that there were some other factors that helped contribute to it, that they were human made. And that adds another layer of complexity and difficulty to this. We even call that moral injury, where in some cases, it may be determined that there was some negligence involved. We have no indication of that at this point, but there's lots of things happening right now and things that'll happen down the road that we'll need to look at and manage.
And because it evolves into different phases, and because human beings are subjective, you also have symptoms and effects when it comes to experiencing trauma. How does that play out?
Yeah, I think just as a little moment of education for our people, sometimes people are responding to trauma, and if they're not well trauma informed, they don't even realize they're having symptoms related to the stress of a trauma. So, and this could be those people who are directly affected, or even those who were vicariously affected in other ways, So like Mark said, I was in the hotel in Haiti that went down during the big earthquake. I was there a couple of days before. So I had that same experience of the near miss, and it's, you feel like you shouldn't feel these things when you weren't really the one, but many of us are the one in many other ways. So some of those symptoms, so I'll name a few, you guys can chime in. So I think the first shock, the emotional feelings of shock or denial. This can't be true. It's really not. And surely, surely it'll be better than it looks like it could be. Some people will just go numb, and they don't even know why they're going numb. There may be people vicariously traumatized because they're distant, but suddenly aren't talking to their spouses. They're just kind of numb. They're going through the motions at work, and maybe they're triggered from some past trauma, and they've gotten re-triggered and they don't even realize it. And they're just zoned out on their feelings. Or maybe the opposite is true. Instead of being numb, they're crying all the time. Can't figure out why they're tearing up over what seem to be little things, or heightened anxiety or insecurity, generalized fears of bad things can happen, so I'm afraid of everything. And so there's this generalized anxiety, and sometimes just being separated from our feelings at all. Our bodies are here and our minds are here and our feelings are here, and we get dissociated, we get separated even within ourselves. We're kind of not sure what we're feeling. So that's some of them. I know you guys have got other ones you want to add to that list.
Well, most people that go through, and some of the research suggests that 80% of people go through a traumatic event and they'll manage without professional help, but there's 10 to 20% that'll need sort of formal help and assistance. Of course, everyone could use psychosocial support because it's really out of the ordinary that we've all been feeling. So even those of us who are quite removed from that event may be feeling some things that are different, and maybe not as intense as those in the core of the event, both in time and in space, as I said earlier. But when things get a little overwhelming, that's when it's really the time to reach out. Things like feelings of threat, sense that your own coping skills, which normally work, don't work anymore. That might mean that you need to reach out, or confusion or even fear about your own reactions in that situation. So it's confusing to you. I've never felt like this. I've never not been able to sleep well. Feelings of distress, discomfort, and just a sense of imbalance, maybe some little ideas that may indicate that you're part of that group that might need to reach out and get some help from some people.
Yeah, and then on the cognitive level, there's disorientation, you feel confused, you have a hard time thinking and concentrating, thoughts that aren't necessarily desired, the idea of feeling unsafe, the idea of images that are very intense, forgetfulness comes into play as well. So when that translates into the body, that's where you have gastrointestinal symptoms, you have headaches. It affects so many facets of the person. That's the part that's striking on the emotional level, on the cognitive level, and physically.
And I think just staying in the state of hyper alert, where you're just waiting for bad things to happen, and so it can show up in your sleeping, you can't sleep, just easily startled, suddenly teary or angry or panicky, just so yeah. And I think I want to say that, we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder is when these normal responses to trauma don't subside with normal care and attending to it. And so when they last for a long time, you stay chronically in a hyper alert state or having some of these dissociated feelings and that kind of thing. But really the key I want to say is that all these things we just listed are actually normal. There's no mental illness to this. This is actually the normal response for the human psyche to overwhelming events that are dangerous to us and that we're helpless to control. And so we just want to let people know you're normal, it's okay, and you can get help, as Mark said, or you can work it through on your own, but don't beat yourself up for feeling these things or being like this.
Exactly. And we're going to broach this further as far as the effects and the different resources available with regards to the recent event that took place. So we're going to take a short break to thank one of our sponsors who makes the production of our podcast possible. When we come back, we'll hear more from Tova and Mark about the Surfside tragedy and Wellspring's response. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. This is Mario Diarmas, your host today. If you're just joining our show, our topic today is the Surfside building collapse tragedy. So far today, we've talked about the impact of this event, the way people cope with this in terms of symptoms, physically, emotionally, and we're going to move on to the idea of what the first responders are doing and the resources available to us. Joining us is Mark McGowan and Tova Krebs. And Mark, I'd actually like to come back to you as far as discussing the first responders, their role, what they're doing currently.
Well, there's many types of responders here, from the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, the other state assets, the federal assets that are coming in, helping removing rubble and recovering survivors and others. There's also the police that are managing the scene. There's the Red Cross and those of the therapists who have been responding and working with the families in the family center that they've set up. But if we think about maybe the fire rescue folks who are working on the scene and in the destruction and having to deal with that, it's very difficult when you get called to do this kind of work. There's the different phases of that too, the adrenaline rush of going to a new job where you're going to be helping. And the reality is, once you get there, there's long hours, which they'd be used to, but it could be many days in the same site with the same kind of processes, and the very slow, and then the pressure of the community, maybe pressure of your own family, who knows people in there, and there's that element that adds more of the pressure just from your job, the constant exposure to some of the dangerous elements that are in a fallen, collapsed building. And it's good to know that they've been given personal protective equipment because of what we've learned from 9/11, for example. So they still have a long haul to go, and things that can happen in that are some of the feelings we already talked about, but things like that could be considered red flags among the responders is again, we talked a little bit about them, but can't stop feeling upset. You can't perform the duty as well. People are seeing sort of a change in you. They recognize it in you. You may start to perhaps drink a little bit more than you would normally be. You'd be jumpy, you'd be withdrawn. You can only talk and focus on the event. So you're in a very tight timeline, and you're dealing with feelings that are maybe a little bit different than you're used to. So the same kind of things that we've learned from survivors can also happen with the other responders. Acute stress disorder, for example, which can happen just a couple of days after the event, up to I think 4 weeks. Post-traumatic stress disorder we talked about is something that wouldn't normally get recognized until at least 30 days after, but you can still have some of those feelings and events that happen there. The other thing I should mention, though, is longer term with first responders, we talk about compassion satisfaction. We also talk about compassion fatigue. And compassion satisfaction is things that really energize them to work. It's the gratification that we get in helping others who have been affected by adversity. And we also have, though, compassion fatigue, which is the concept of burnout that we probably know about, but also secondary trauma. And there's effective ways of measuring that, and I can share that at the appropriate time in this session, where people can do a self-assessment. And I always encourage the first responders, whether you're working directly on the mound, for example, all the way to you're working with others who've been affected by it on a more remote level, that you self-assess and know where you are in that. I have to say, though, just that we can, like most people, will make it through really strong. And we've talked about resilience. I talked about compassion satisfaction, but we can also talk about vicarious resilience, that through this effort, we get stronger in the process. And that can happen with the responders as well. So it's just a matter of being recognizing the feelings that you're having, being able to assess them and then act on them if they're a little out of the ordinary for you.
I really like that, Mark, because it's got the positive aspect that we really believe at Wellspring, but we have a term called post-traumatic growth, and that hard things do make us wiser and stronger and better if we handle them well. We think about building muscle. We have emotional muscles. We can actually be better at soothing ourselves, calming ourselves, regulating ourselves. Those are things we can learn to do. And so I think we can remember that there are good things that can come out of these hard times in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to whether it's fatigue or whether it's building that resiliency, we also are guided by knowing there are things available to us. And when it comes to Wellspring, it's a trauma specialized therapy group, right? So in the midst of understanding what is needed and recognizing, I'm at the point of burning out, or I might be drinking too much, or suddenly I'm lashing out. And before that, I had much more patience. Recognizing that and then taking the steps to go to the proper place. That's where a place like Wellspring comes in. What does it mean, Tova, that Wellspring specializes in trauma?
Well, I actually believe trauma is curable, and that's important, and that many of us, research says, will have one major traumatic event in our lives, something like 60%. That varies from male to female, but in any case, but most of us have bad things that happen in general. We just have bad things that happen in our lives, and there are degrees of bad things, but we can recover from them. We can be stronger and wiser, but it does require actual sometimes specialized professional help. It's a little different. The memories that we have, our traumatic memories, are stored differently in our brain than normal memories, because our bodies kick in, are physiologically engaged with adrenaline rushes and things like that, that change our memories, that change, heighten the sensory pieces of our memories, and that tend to do this separation a little bit between body and mind and emotions and things. And so because it's different, sometimes we need specialized services to actually get at that. So if you've been disconnected in yourself, traditional talk therapy may not actually get completely at it because the memories are sensory or the memories are other things. So trauma specialists have learned tools that can get at the sensory pieces, that use experiential therapies. At Wellspring, we specialize in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's called EMDR, which is a specific tool that's particularly helpful with trauma. So really, because I just believe in this so strongly, I have encouraged all of our team, and when we get new therapists, everybody, if they aren't already trauma specialists, they become them. And so that is just kind of the one thing that we specialize in. We also do marital, we do other things. We do a little of everything, but everyone on our team eventually becomes trauma specialized. And so this kind of disaster, this is what we do. But we're not on the scene, we're not the first responders. We're the week later, a month later, a year later, we're there for helping people restore their hearts and their minds through specialized treatment. And we believe it works. So I want to real specifically name some of the things we're doing for Surfside. So we are getting some funding, and that's been wonderful. We've had people call and generously offer to provide it. We have a donation page for people who want to help us provide free therapy. So we're providing free therapy for individuals who are directly affected by this, whether that means they were displaced or they're first responders, as Mark's talked about, or people who've lost their loved ones directly. We are also providing free group support for those who are directly affected or those who have been triggered because of this event and need to process their anxieties about it, maybe triggered from old things. So group therapy, individual therapy. We also have 2 programs that already exist, that are already on the books and schedule, because this is what we do. One is called Bounce for youth who've been traumatized. And we have another one of those coming up in July. So we want to talk, I'll let you talk about that, Mario. And then we also have a program called Restore, which is like our adult bounce. So it's an intensive trauma resolution therapy for adults. And again, this is perfectly appropriate for this group of people. But Mario, let me take a second. You were one of our group leaders in Bounce last year. So why don't you tell about our Bounce program?
So Bounce is a week-long geared towards youth from ages 9 to 19. And it's trauma education. And it has a combination of group and individual therapy, incredible opportunity to revisit certain events using certain modalities geared towards that addressing of the trauma. So whether it's bilateral tapping and being able to unearth certain emotions connected to that memory, I've seen marvelous things take place through this particular experience, and having it a week long and having fun activities that actually bring about the rapport between the clinician and the participants just opens them up towards the process. And remarkable things have happened because of the capacity to heal. So I've seen it firsthand. We just had one take place, and another one is actually approaching July 26th, and the deadline for that is July 16th. So I can't say enough about it, and I'm so eager to partake in it once more.
Yeah, there's something really powerful about being with other people who have had bad things happen to them. It doesn't feel so isolating and why me. And we do make it fun. It's scary to kind of attend and do this work for the adults or the kids. It's like, really, I'm gonna do this for a week, but we have great success. We have people who are so satisfied. We say, come the first day. If you don't want to do it, don't come back. And pretty much they always come back and leave saying, I'm so grateful and I've had major change. So the Restore retreat is for adults, and it's September 29th. And so you can go to our website to find out information on that. It's a 4-day process. Again, with groups. It's remote, so it's accessible to people beyond. And I want to say, I know there are people listening to our program today who are not in the Miami community, and I want you to know that we have a lot of remote services, individual therapy, even the online Bounce and the online Restore. our programs are available for people of other types of tragedies that they've gone through. So this is what we do. We don't get out of the hard work ourselves. As I said at the beginning of the show, we are personally affected by this particular disaster and have loved ones involved, and our hearts are breaking, and we're praying and we're rallying. So we don't get to, knowing a lot about trauma doesn't mean you get to skip the hard work of grief and loss and anxiety, but we do know how to get at it. And so hopefully we practice what we preach. I got a team of therapists outside of us coming in and debriefing our team this week, because we do try to practice what we preach. Again, there are great things that can be done, and you just have to walk through those steps together.
So after discussing all of this and going over the heart of it, the key question is as follows. Do you believe that people can recover from a tragedy of this nature?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd say more, but I know we're short on time, but the absolute yes is true.
Yep. And as we wrap up, what would you say, very succinctly, are unhealthy ways to handle something as tragic as this?
I think resorting to bad habits of, so whether it's substance abuse and medicating, or just shutting down and not letting people in or know, or beating yourself up for feeling the way you are instead of giving permission and then going toward it and experiencing it. So those are all really ways of avoiding. And we don't get through it well by avoiding. We actually get through it better and faster by moving toward the pain, toward those feelings, and getting help from people around us, our loved ones, our supporters, our friends, family, and professionals if we need to. Unhealthy is just staying away from it, and then it lingers for a long time in your life.
Mark, you would concur?
Yeah. I was just going to add that it might be a tendency to regain control by bullying others. And again, that's an ineffective way of coping with this, binge eating, overworking, things like that. So.
Yeah, letting our fear drive us to control. So I'm going to stay safe by controlling myself, others, the world around me. And we actually don't have all that control. So letting fear be generalized and then affecting our lives.
And grounded in our faith and in the overwhelming power of God, we take consolation and solace in this beautiful part of scripture, Psalm 23, verse 3. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for the sake of his name. So we take comfort in that. So as we wrap up, Tova, do you have anything to say?
Very quickly, I just want to say that our website, wellspringmiami.org, has a page for resources for this. So the test that Mark commented on for first responders and other resources that you can find, links to getting services, individual or group therapy, trauma information, anything like that is on our website, wellspringmiami.org. So just go there for more information.
So it's time to close out the show. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you listeners have had some encouragement about facing the Surfside tragedy or other traumatic events. And thank you for joining us. Again, if you join program midstream, you can find the show and others on podcasts at Wellspring on the Air or on our blog on wellspringmiami.org. The title of today's show is The Surfside Tragedy of the Building Collapse and Wellspring's Response. Encourage us and let us know that you are listening by sending comments or questions to ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. It's time to wrap up. This is Mario DeArmas with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.